Hey everybody, it's Jim of Animateducated, and today we have Aniket Natekar, who is a CG animator as well as I believe you've done 2D animation too, haven't you?
That's right. Yep.
Okay, so how did you get into animation? Did someone show you something that caught your attention, or what?
A
How did you?
little bit of everything. So I was the kid who always used to draw. I used to love watching cartoons and stuff. And one of my favorite movies, like I had almost like this aha moment, is The Lion King. It's absolutely one of my favorite movies. And when I was young, I used to rent VHSs and then go to my aunt's place on the weekend because we didn't have a VHS yet at home. So I'd rent it, go there, and then I would watch it, go to bed, and in the morning I'd watch the movie again, and then my aunt would watch it with me. And when Mufasa dies in that movies, I was just bawling my eyes, and my aunt just said, like, it's crazy how drawings can make you emote, and something went off in my head. And like that's amazing, and it stuck true to me. So from there, kind of my interest went from just drawing or cartoon or comics to animation, and then especially Disney animation and stuff. So it stayed with me, even though being in India, I first became an engineer. I'm a good boy. And then then I followed my dreams and then came to Canada to Vancouver Film School and started doing 2D animation. But I think that spark really pushed me or propelled me. So in Vancouver Film School, I did 2D animation.
Mhm.
So I asked, animated on paper and then in Flash and stuff. And then that was in 2008 with recession, not many jobs. And then this studio in France reaches out to our school and say, hey, we need 2D animators. I'm like, hey, we need a job. So it was perfect. I went there, and it's when because the level and the culture in France was so good, but the language was always a barrier. So in my mind, I always wanted to come back to Canada because I love Vancouver. But when I came back, I know in Vancouver, the 2D industry was pretty much at TV, at least then. And I wanted to keep going into features for sure. So when I came back, I was looking for ways to get into CG animation. And that's when I just stumbled upon CG Spectrum.
And that was like in 2012 to 2014.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you went into, got in, somehow you get to Titmouse.
Yeah.
And then
So Titmouse was, it was funny because the timeline was, so when I came back as I started, I decided to quit my job in France and move back. That's sort of exactly the time when I started working with CG Spectrum. Then I moved back to Canada. I was working in TV as an animation revisionist and then an animation supervisor. But then at night, I was still doing my CG Spectrum.
Was that Bronze Studios or something like that?
So that came after. So
that came after. Okay.
Yeah, I was at DHX, which is now WildBrain, where I was a animation supervisor on some of the TV shows. And then once I finished my education from CG Spectrum and I had a CG reel, then I applied to some feature studios in Vancouver, and that's what got me the job at Ron. And that's where I also met Rob Lodemeyer, which is another one of our mentors as well. And it's just an amazing mentor in general because he took me under his wing because I had experience, but I had limited CG experience, but he saw potential in me and he really entrusted me, which helped me grow a lot. So I worked there for like 5 years. We worked on 2 shows, Henchmen and later the Willoughbys. And it was one of my best places I worked at so far, for sure. And Rob has a big role in that being the reason.
So were you affected by COVID in any way? Where were you? Were you here or were you somewhere else?
So I was in Vancouver then. So right now I'm in the Bay Area. So I was in Vancouver since after I came back from France, so since 2012 to earlier this year. And I was working at Sony then. So I just finished working on Over the Moon. And that's when COVID was becoming bigger and bigger. And then after that, I took a break. And during that break is when most studios, including Sony, decided to go completely working from home. And I was a little like, well, in between projects, you suddenly start working from home. But they kept their word. I had a new project, next project lined up, and then I worked on Vivo completely from home.
Okay, so
So
you worked on some big films so far, so that's pretty good. I
I've
mean,
been fortunate.
yeah.
Mhm.
What was your experience like on Over the Moon?
I was over the moon to be on that movie. Had to say that. Uh, it was. I mean, Glenn Keane has somehow has meant a lot to me because when I was still in India and I actually decided that okay, I'm doing engineering, but for sure I want to get into animation. I had kind of like I was looking for ways to learn animation within institutes in India, and one of the mentors there, when I just met him, he just introduced me to Glenn Keane and just showed me some of Glenn Keane's CalArts lessons were on YouTube, right? And I was just blown away by this incredibly talented person, his sincerity to his approach to work, and how even like, when some people draw so well and you're like, I could never do that. But what I loved about Glenn Keane is he's so sincere that he does amazing work, but it makes you believe you could do that if you just, and that's very inspiring. So when I heard that he was working on a movie at Sony in Vancouver, and then when they hired me, I was like, this is special. And then we got to meet him. We got to, he would do like drawovers and even talk about characters. And just again, he's been in this industry for so long, but he's so sincere towards his craft. It's amazing. So just that we did a lot of overtime on Over the Moon, but it's his passion that was like, yeah, it compels you to keep learning, and that was like my favorite part of being on that show. And then actually the switch to games was a personal as well as professional decision. So I've always like ever since like Overwatch cinematics came out and stuff, I'm like, oh, I mean, game stuff is looking better and better. I really like the cinematics or something, and it's a newer challenge. But I'll be honest, the main driving force was also my wife, who was my girlfriend then. She then moved to San Francisco because she found work here, and she's an academic, so she can't just find work as easily. So then ever since the last 2 years, I was just trying to find work here as well. So it was a little personal driven as well as having that kind of passive or dormant interest in games. So kind of like, okay, I love it, so I'm gonna dig into that. And again, just like CG Spectrum, I found some online courses. I always like to keep learning. So I read some books. I opened Unreal. I actually made a games reel out, and then started applying here, and that got me here. So I keep working hard, and then I think luck supports me once I work hard. What I like is you could do cinematics, and then the cinematics that you see in some of the games are basically becoming mini feature films, and then that sounds exciting. So the possibility. At the same time, I really, really, really miss doing acting. So much so that I'm like, okay, while I'm again before the baby comes, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna take some workshop and again do some acting on the side. So I'm keeping my creative juices flowing because maybe I get into cinematics, maybe I go back to features. I want to keep. I really acting and doing feature films is like that's my primary drive that got me into this. So that's my primary passion for sure.
So you basically you went back to becoming an animation mentor for CG Spectrum.
Yes.
And so, what do you do in that? What classes do you teach there?
So far, I've only done the introduction to animation. That's the two classes within the semester or two workshops, however you want to say it. And I had some like great students. So it was more of the basics, and so much so that I'm like, hey, I had to revise a few things that I may not use every day. But I've always liked teaching. So even when I was a lead, like on the Willoughbys or something, like a lot of the junior animators gave me that feedback that we we like when you give us notes because I'm to me like when I give notes, I'm trying to think together. I'm not trying to tell people what to do because nobody has the answers. It's a subjective field. But what I liked about mentoring was just you think out loud. your analysis of what you're seeing and as you react. So kind of that gave me clarity. So by mentoring or by teaching, it helps me improve as well, and hopefully I can impart knowledge. And also when I learn, or there are some things you have your light bulb moments later and say, oh, I wish I'd learned this sooner. So I try to use that and impart that as soon as I can. So it's a great experience for me. I hope the students feel the same. But yeah, I hope to do that, resume that again soon.
Do you give them any tips about acting, or?
I attended this class by James Baxter in Vancouver. He said, like, because animators it's not a monolith, right? Some people, like I've worked with some people who are brilliant. Like when they shoot video reference for an acting, I'm like, you could just like be on stage. Like they're so good. But others, even myself, I'm somewhere in the half. Depending on the character, I sometimes find I have good reference, but sometimes it's like a shorthand. I do the reference, but I know what I'm getting out of it. So James Baxter had once said, like, we're not all actors with a pencil necessarily. We are like actor adjacent, I think he had said. Don't quote me on this. And in the sense, it was like, you don't necessarily have to be able to act, but you have to at least understand what's going on. You want to be able to just observe what's happening, even though you can't do it necessarily with your body. And I think that is key. And it comes down to developing your eye and your kind of brain for noticing things. So I go on that, and which is why if you do video reference or 2D, it's like take the essence and how to keep working on it like a sculptor. That's my approach to acting and to getting an acting performance in animation.
Do you have any personal work that you're working on, or you just kind of do the work for someone else? Or
taking this workshop where it's kind of really forcing you to get closer to acting and not think of the animation. Like animation is the medium you're using, but it's been really nice to, again, back to basics, nothing necessarily completely new that I'm learning, but really get to focus on acting and what makes acting choices specific to a character and not just generic. And putting so one of the things is like we just like blocked a new shot every week, and then I can put in the time and polish. But it's like, okay, now here's a character in this scenario, these are her quirks, and it's kind of been like doing improv for animation, and I'm really enjoying that.
Do you watch any old films? Are you a film person, or are you more?
I do. A couple of months ago, watched The Odd Couple for the first time, the original with Jack Lemmon and I'm just not even gonna.
Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. Yeah, there he is. Yeah,
and it was so good. I've always heard about it. I've seen clips from it, but I never like just sat down and watched it.
Oh,
and
okay.
It was amazing.
Yeah, I always try to get my students to, go watch a movie.
What I love a lot about, if you may call them older movie, is they take their time, in the sense even within a shot. It's not erratic, cuts are not fast. So you really you have to be a good actor to get a shot. I watched another movie with him called I think The Out of Towners. Is that right? Mm-hmm. It's just so good. They're just going to trip to, I think, New York City, and just bad things keep happening. Such a simple story, but just so well executed. And again, the choices are so specific to who the characters are that it's nice to it's easy to follow. It's easy to ultimately what the aim is. It's easy to believe that these are real people and they're in these real circumstances. And sometimes not, it doesn't always work. Sometimes which the good thing is nowadays, their movies are often more, at least the good ones, about the story, but don't necessarily always know the character as well. And it's good. I find that better in some of these simpler, older movies.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on Animateducated and just, talking to me and telling us all about what you're doing and all that. It sounds like you're going to be doing a lot more
Yes, I hope so.
in the future. But I want to wish you great success with your,
Thanks, Jim.
with your baby.
Oh, yeah, she's gonna be a daughter.
A daughter. Okay.
Yes.
Hope everything comes out all right, as we say,
Yes. Thank
everything's
you.
good. And yeah, that's a whole other journey that you're going to be taking now. And,
Yeah.
and, but yeah, we'll
And
stay
thank
in
you for
touch.
taking the time. It was an absolute pleasure to meet you. And yeah, I hope to talk to you more in the
Okay.
future. All right.
So I hope you enjoyed that interview with Aniket Natekar. And we want to congratulate him and his wife on the birth of their daughter, Ella, that happened shortly after this interview. So yeah, Happy New Year and happy new baby. So yeah, so I want to thank everybody for watching. And if you want to be a subscriber to this thing, you just push that button right there to become a subscriber. Also, I have some other videos here. I've got this one up here. This is pretty good. And yeah, that's pretty good too. So check those out, and we'll see you next time on Animated Educated.